everyone, and welcome to the possibly last, but we'll find out, the third episode of TalkiNindies. Thanks to Dusky Azure, the same person who asked some questions last week. They actually sent me four. I just decided to break them up. Just as a note, for anybody who'd like to hear a fourth episode of TalkiNindies, I need more questions because I'm gonna be out after this. But anyway, so third episode, Dusky Azure. One of the other questions they asked was, do you think the Nindie scene benefits from the Game Pass model, or do you believe it restricts it further? That's a tough one, because they're very different concepts, and Game Pass is sort of straddling the line, because they have certainly non-indie games, but then they include indie games as they aren't the main event. They're just sort of support, and those can definitely there can be benefit to getting exposure. The way I'd think about it's a thought process for me. So the way I think about it is a lot like Humble Bundle, though obviously different. Humble Bundles, like, they were definitely the gateway for me for indie games, because now typically all of the games in the package were indies of some kind, but the ideal way you'd see these things work for smaller indies would be that they gain exposure because people are attracted to sort of the main event indie game. So they buy the bundle, and your game is coming along for the ride, and the hope is that those people will then decide to check everything out because, hey, you paid for it. And that's really the way it worked for me. When I first got into indies on PC, before the Switch, that was what sort of sold me on indie games, because I would pick up a Humble Bundle and there would be these other games. I'd eventually decide, well, I should at least check these out. And probably, like I think I said on the last one, probably 50% of the time, the games I was checking out, it was like, wow, this is actually really good. And that sort of, rewired my brain of expectation for what indies could do, because I didn't really have very many expectations. Much like what I was saying, what I felt that Nintendo's classic view of indie games was, trended towards shovelware, and I really think of the waning days of the Wii. It happened early in the waning days, but the gold rush of just crap that showed up on the Wii, full of waggle controls, and everybody. There was sort of tiers, like Carnival Games was on the edge. Like they legitimately put effort into making something that had some entertaining stuff to it. So I'd consider them sort of the bottom rung before it went into shovelware of all the imitators of things like Carnival Games that were like, hey, we can throw together this bunch of motion controlled nonsense that doesn't play very well, but people buy it. And just so many people did that it really killed the end of the Wii. I just stopped playing. I just put the system away, because there were the games that I did enjoy, almost all Nintendo first party stuff, and a couple that were, Capcom had a couple that were fun, but man, once the late system gold rush of nonsense began, I just couldn't anymore, because I was getting sort of tired of the waggling, and and my family was sort of tired of it. So yeah. Anyway, so with that in mind, I don't know that the indie industry, or the indie game making industry, I don't know that they suffer from it. I guess there's a realistic problem that on other systems, on the systems where Game Pass is available. I think there might be a damned if you do, damned if you don't problem of getting involved in Game Pass. There have been cases where games that didn't necessarily expect to be super successful got onto Game Pass and perhaps lost revenue because the deal that they inked, nobody knew what success they would have and how popular they would become. But at the same time, then you end up having to wonder, well, but if they weren't on Game Pass and so many people didn't get exposed to them, quote, for free, for the, depending on how you think about your Game Pass subscription once you have it, there's a fair question of whether or not you could have reached that audience and that depth, and whether word of mouth would have been enough, or whether you would have had enough of a catalyst to finding those initial people that would shout loud enough and enough people that would listen that you could get out there. Because the main problem for, I think, all indie games that aren't from an established publisher or from they're fighting against the wave, where it's a small group where they aren't connected to anybody in particular, and they're just simply trying to get the word out about their game. It's a challenge. Discoverability is an enormous problem for anybody, especially if you're just starting out, or if you're a small studio, or if you're not pairing with, like I said, a bigger publisher. I don't doubt it's a challenge. So for people that are at that stage, the concept of even, so let's say that you could have been more successful, etc. But if you really believe in the type of product that you're making, and that what you're doing can be, replicated. So you have a firm belief that even if you're making your, first game that you're really reaching out with, that you believe in, if you believe that you can do that again, if it's not a fluke, if it's not lightning in a bottle, if you really believe in what you're capable of, I would think it would be a pretty appealing proposition, because even if you sort of eat it on that first one, the exposure and the hopefully the fact that what you've done is in some way memorable could make it a worthwhile proposition for the future. I imagine that can be really hard to think ahead to, though, because if you're really that small, you don't necessarily have the money to have that faith that in another X, depending on how fast your turnaround time is on a fully developed game, maybe 2 years, depending on the scope and how many people there are and all that. It's a tough value proposition, because maybe you don't have the ability to make that investment because you need the money now, especially if you want to keep making games. You really need to make enough to sustain yourself, and if you're a small market indie making a deal, I have no idea what the going rate is, what they get for being included in something like Game Pass, and because you're, for a month or some period of time, you're essentially signing away all the sales that you could be getting. So and I'm sure they're compensated in some way. I don't know if there is additional compensation based off of tiers, based on how many people end up downloading and playing the game. I would hope things like that are taken into consideration, because it seems unfair if they weren't. So I think I think there's not a clear answer either way. I think there are benefits, strategic ones certainly, but I can see where it doesn't work out for everyone. Even if you got a lot of exposure, even if people, quote, knew your name, if you also know that, say 2 years from now, or even a year, because people's memories are short, if your next game was going to be coming out in a year, whether or not you really can maintain the momentum of people having an interest would be a fair question. Like I said, especially now in this age, memories are extremely short. You can, if you are burning hot last month, you could already be nothing now, and people have already forgotten. So it is a tricky thing. So it's all about calculated risks. And then the second question that Dusky Azure had was, if Game Pass was on Switch, what games would you want to see? And this is, I'm going to go down a road that I wasn't sure if I wanted to really dig into, but it seems very relevant. And this is years ago, and this was all spitballing, and there was nothing certainly official. I don't think anything official was ever planned. I don't even know if any of this was pitched. It was just something that that I had some conversations with Kirk Scott about back when he was in charge of Indies. The topic came up, whether or not I was casually asking, or whether or not he was just trying to get something worked out in his head. But it came up about, this was before Nintendo had their and they had their online service, but it was before they had their subscription for their premium tier of content. But it was what do you think an indie focused subscription would look like, and how would that work? And it was interesting to talk about. I certainly brought up Humble because they have a model that does exist, and I wasn't sure how much you could pry to get at least some peripheral details about what they were doing and how successful. I mean, I would think that you could certainly talk to indie developers that had been involved in some of their ongoing Humble monthly deals, to just pick their brain, and I don't know if they're under NDAs or something, but just to get some generality ideas about what they were doing. I thought that would emulating, or at least talking to people that were an existing model, it would be good, just general information to start with. But it all revolved around there was questions of I don't think that you'd want the people to retain these things. I think you'd want it to be like Game Pass versus PlayStation Plus, where you'd have access to these things for the period of a month or whatever the term of any given availability of games was, and that it wouldn't be something you'd have permanently. So I think you could certainly offer anybody who'd played these and who wanted to buy them. I would hope that you'd offer them at a cut rate, whether half off or something. So it'd be like, you had fun playing our game for a month and you want to keep playing. Here, spend half of its normal price or some cut amount, so that the people could recoup some sales on the tail end. But yeah, indefinite retention of your game seemed like a no-go. That didn't make sense as a strategy. But so that came up. Then it came up with, well, how do you incentivize, particularly for the big, the quote big indie game, in the game that's going to be in the barrel. So this is a game that already knows that they're going to be successful, or perhaps is already successful. That it's going to eat it for a month, not getting their direct revenue, but fronting this bundle, because they're not going to be dumb. They're going to understand that they're the one at the forefront. They're the one that's going to get the advertising, whatever advertising there would be, and they're going to be the one that's pulling the others. So great examples. The idea at the time was, could you entice Motion Twin or these other bigger places, or like Devolver, for some of their bigger titles to be the game in a barrel for a month. Dead Cells, Hades would be quite an ask, But could you get one of these bigger games to sort of front the bundle, and then getting the other ones to be involved? You'd have to negotiate and figure out how the smaller ones would work, how you'd even choose them. I mean, there's a lot of things that would go into this that would be difficult. But that was always the challenge. Okay, how do you get the big game to pull the others along? And for the smaller ones that would want in, how would you structure it? So like I said, all this stayed very hypothetical, but it was an interesting conversation to have. And the thing is, the thing that occurs to me now, further down the road, is Nintendo would actually be in an excellent position doing something like this, because they've sort of the time it takes for them between big releases of their subscription service for things like N64 games, games that really, because a lot of the stuff offered by Nintendo Online has been questionable in its value. But with the subscription service, if you're willing to spend more money, for me, still more money than I'm willing to spend for tapping into some nostalgia very briefly. But if we went down that road, so Nintendo already now, so all the discussion that I'd had about that it's sort of moot, because once Nintendo had the subscription plan in place with their own back catalog, some other plan wouldn't have made any sense, and most likely, anything that Kirk might have proposed would have been quashed because of Nintendo's own plans for their subscription service tied to their own, premium back catalog games. But the thing is, I think that they've solved one of the problems that we had, and it could be interesting because, now, if Nintendo could get more consistent with when these, new big games came out, the new N64 games, or God hopes new GameCube games, that they could advance the ball a little further to get into a deeper era. You'd think that they're certainly capable of running at least some stuff on the hardware successfully, etc. But it would make an interesting model that they've got the game in the barrel then. So they've got their own first party game, or they've got they've got some former title that a bunch of people are inherently interested in, and some indie games that are taking a chance and being involved in this and getting exposure. There's actually a decent value proposition to that now, that we're going to be included on the month that people see Wave Race 64. Okay, Wave Race 64 may not be a huge draw for everyone, but it's a known game. There are people like me that are very interested about seeing that. So the indies could benefit because now they're tied to something, and they get some exposure tied to this premium Nintendo game. And from Nintendo's side, it's not like it's a free thing, or it's not like they don't take on anything. Obviously, to get any indies, even smaller market ones, they'd have to go through making some kind of deal. They would have to be compensating in some fashion. So it's not like this is free, but Nintendo could take an approach that says, we've got our game, and we're hoping that we're getting people to buy this additional subscription cost, because we're periodically releasing these games out of our back catalog that we know people would really like to see. But it would sort of sweeten the deal to be able to say, and we've got these 4 or 5 smaller market indie games that have some quirk and some interest. They're along for the ride this month as well, and I think that could work. And the thing is, you've got Nintendo has more leverage than it needs, because it could say, hey, if you want to do this, I know that you might be reluctant about signing away your profit for a month, but we could work something out where up front, hey, we're going to, one of the conditions for these smaller games, if they're on the fence, we can include you in a Nintendo Direct or one of the indie directs. You could obviously you could wait. You don't need it to be the launch of an indie game. You could certainly wait 6 months in, or you could have some grace period where you're not taking their thunder right away, and let the indie developer sort of feel like they had the chance to do their own launch. They can see whether or not they were successful, and as long as Nintendo didn't telegraph their moves well in advance. So you didn't, if you knew that in a month or two this game was going to be for free and you had the subscription, obviously you might not be inclined to buy it. But as long as they kept hush about what would be included and when, until very close to the time it started, you aren't going to harm the success of the indie game. But I could see where this, it could be a beneficial kind of system on all sides, because hey, maybe it's you got the exposure in the indie direct, so we promoted you ahead of time to sort of sweeten and prime the pump for people. They've now heard about you. They've seen you on something official. Nintendo is sort of indirectly given some kind of endorsement of what they believe will be a good product, because why would they put you in a direct if they didn't believe that? So now your game releases, you get out there, you're hoping to make some good coin, and then a few months later, maybe every time Nintendo is going to release a new batch, they create a little direct that's just about what's coming this month type of thing, and they drop it only maybe a week or two, maybe even just a week before the new one comes out. You're trying to get people excited. You're trying to get your existing subscribers excited about what's coming next, and you're also trying to entice new people to the table. And the thing is, that's where I see this sort of dual strategy being beneficial. That you've got nostalgia driven people that are like, oh wow, well, this isn't coming out, but and I don't know anything about whether it would come out, but just taking a game that is sometimes loved, sometimes reviled, but it is certainly an interesting game. But they could say, this month's big game is going to be Donkey Kong 64, complete with DK rap. You gotta leave with DK rap, but along for the ride, you also have, for a month, you'll have access to pick some smaller ones that have been out for a while, or games that may have new releases coming around the corner. So like an excellent one to include sooner than later, the original Rogue Legacy, a really old game actually, but maybe something people haven't played, and Rogue Legacy 2 exists out there on some other systems, so I imagine at some point it's coming to Switch. So that would be a sensible kind of game, but you could line up some of these games and giving them some time in the sun, and maybe part of this, the way to make this successful, is that Nintendo would wait on games to have been out for quite some time. So the publisher, developer has seen diminishing returns in general. Just sales have really petered out quite a bit, and you're hoping for that that second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever wind, on the tail end of perhaps what your expectations are for it being successful and continue to generate revenue. But it's just, like I said, so you've got sort of a win-win. Nintendo puts more meat into what their offering is for a given month. They've already got their game in the barrel that they made, so that they eliminate that as a problem. But they're just sweetening the deal, and they're improving their connection to the indie developers. Even if it's, like I said, even if you get years down the road, just being engaged and including indies in your plan, I can't see how there's really a downside to that. I imagine Nintendo would be looking to minimize what they would have to invest um, to get these people to sign on for a month. Again, like I said, they have actually, in these kinds of situations, they would have an enormous amount, or even all the leverage, especially if their game's in the barrel. This is a pretty easy offer for anybody who's smaller to want to be enticed by. Like I said, to get that second, third, fourth, fifth wind down the road when your projections for your revenue should be relatively modest. But yeah, I mean, I've got games in my top 100 of any given genre. There's tons of them sitting in there that trying to think of a good one that has been around for quite a while that could use some eyes, and is probably smaller. So going really old school, you got something like Battle Chef Brigade, really interesting mix, and certainly it's eye catching. With its, it has a decent look, but this concept of mixing, combat to collect ingredients that you're going to use to perform in Iron Chef style battles, like people discovering that. I'm sure tons of people have not heard of it, or never heard of it. So that would be a good candidate. Yoku's Island Express is something that several people brought up on my last giveaway as a hybrid game that they really enjoyed. But yeah, pinball Metroidvania. That's extremely cute, and as a pinball fan, a great joy to play. Just a thoroughly different idea, but again, probably something a lot of people haven't heard of without without a site like mine or something, because it was released quite some time ago. There are tons of games out there. Nobody's searching for Pinball Metroidvania, I don't think. It's a weird enough concept that I don't think anybody is explicitly looking for such a thing. So your discovery has come and gone. That window that you could get discovered, it's gone. So your best hope is some kind of new spark to make people look, or to get people to give it some attention. Tumble Seed is another game I love, and I remember that being, I think that was on one of the first indie directs way back when. But yeah, I mean, Assault Android Cactus is absolutely one of the best shooters, twin stick shooters I've ever played. Deserves all the attention and all the glory, but with the exception of other fans like me, I don't see there being an enormous clamor around that title. But those would be these perfect kinds of titles where, if Nintendo could work out a deal and they could include them on their monthly subscription for access, like I said, I think I just see that type of thing being a win-win. That they sort of bring up what Nintendo's offering for their subscription, because, like I said, as much as I love some of the premier Nintendo games that are releasing on it, it's expensive, and I don't, because I have a family plan, and my family wouldn't use that like I do, so I'd be the only one using that, and yet, for me to pay that extra premium, I just can't see it for nostalgia. But if I were a consumer that didn't have all these other, if I didn't have all these games already, having some other games that look like they could be interesting, that were along for the ride, that were non-Nintendo, I could see being more enticed by that. So, if I could do it, if I could, dictate it, I think that's what I would do. And if there was something on Switch, that seems to be in line with, a way that they keep with the strategy that they have. They make their subscription, they've got to be thinking that they could be making more money off the subscription than they are. And I don't doubt that they could be. And this would be a great window to getting some more. So I don't know, but that's my rambling thoughts on all that. Sorry for the ride if it was a bit confusing. Just this is the way my brain works, and you're getting the stream of consciousness version of everything. But that's how this works. Hopefully that's what the crazy people out there who think this is fun, hopefully this is what you're looking for. And on that note, again, if you would like to have another episode, I have run out of questions at this point. So the only way another episode arrives is if people have questions to ask that I can then answer. So if you would like to have another episode, be sure to send a question to justin@nindiespotlight.com, and I'll put it in the hopper, and we'll have something more to talk about. So if somebody else is able to come up with some questions, we'll be in good shape, and I'll talk to you again. And if not, it's been a fun experiment, and thank you all for listening. Thanks.